Peace. I'm Rami Salamel. Thank you for joining us. On this episode of Occult History, we're going to be examining James Traficant's U.S. bankruptcy speech. But before we do, I wanted to read for the record the definition of bankruptcy from, Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. It is on page 186, and it reads, "The condition of one who has committed an act of bankruptcy and is liable to be proceeded against by his creditors therefore." Further down, "The proceedings taken under the bankrupt law against a person or firm or company to have him adjudged a bankrupt and to have his estate administered for the benefit of the creditors and divided among them." Why is that important? Grab a pen and paper. Let's find out. The Bankruptcy of the United States. United States Congressional Record, March 17th, 1993, Volume 33, page H1303. Speaker, Republican James Traficant Jr., Traficant of Ohio, addressing the House. Mr. Speaker, we are here now in Chapter 11. Members of Congress are official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in world history, the U.S. government. We are setting forth, hopefully, a blueprint for our future. There are some who say it is a coroner's report that will lead to our demise. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, March 9th, 1933, 48 Statute Number 1, Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt, being bankrupt and insolvent. Let me read that sentence again. It is an established fact that the United States federal government has been dissolved by the Emergency Banking Act, March 9th, 1933, 48 Statute 1, Public Law 89-719, declared by President Roosevelt, being bankrupt and insolvent. HJR House Joint Resolution 192, 73rd Congress, Session June 5th, 1933, Joint Resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold clause, dissolve the sovereign authority of the United States and the official capacities of all United States governmental offices, officers, and departments, and is further evidence that the United States federal government exists today in name only. The receivers of the United States bankruptcy are the international bankers, via the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. All United States offices, officials, and departments are now operating within a de facto status, DEFACTO, de facto status, in name only, under emergency war powers. With the constitutional Republican form of government now dissolved, the receivers of the bankruptcy have adopted a new form of government for the United States. This new form of government is known as a democracy, being an established socialist and communist order under a new governor for America. This act was instituted and established by transferring and or placing the office of the Secretary of Treasury to that of the Governor of the International Monetary Fund. Public Law 94-564, page 8, Section House Resolution 13955 reads in part, "The U.S. Secretary of Treasury receives no compensation for representing the United States. Gold and silver were such a powerful money during the founding of the United States of America that the Founding Fathers declared that only gold and silver coins can be money in America. Since gold and silver coinage were heavy and inconvenient for a lot of transactions, they were stored at banks and a claim check was issued as a money substitute. People traded their coupons as money or currency. Currency is not money, but a money substitute. Redeemable currency must promise to pay a dollar equivalent in gold or silver money. Federal Reserve notes make no such promises and are not money. A Federal Reserve note is a debt obligation of the federal United States government, not money. The federal United States government and the U.S. Congress were not and have never been authorized by the Constitution for the United States of America to issue currency of any kind, but only lawful money, gold and silver coin. It is essential that we comprehend the distinction between real money and paper money substitute. One cannot get rich by accumulating money substitutes. One can only get deeper into debt. We the people no longer have any money. Most Americans have not been paid any money for a very long time. Perhaps not in their entire life. Now do you comprehend why you feel broke? Now do you understand why you are bankrupt, along with the rest of the country? Federal Reserve notes are unsigned checks written on a closed account. Federal Reserve notes are an inflatable paper system designed to create debt through inflation, devaluation of currency. Whenever there is an increase of the supply of a money substitute in the economy without a corresponding increase in the gold and silver backing, inflation occurs. Inflation is an invisible form of taxation that irresponsible governments inflict on their citizens. The Federal Reserve Bank, who controls the supply and movements of Federal Reserve notes, has everybody fooled. They have access to an unlimited supply of Federal Reserve notes, paying only for the printing costs of what they need. Federal Reserve notes are nothing more than promissory notes for the U.S. Treasury securities, T-bills, a promise to pay the debt to the Federal Reserve Bank. There is a fundamental difference between the paying and discharging a debt. There is a fundamental difference between paying and discharging a debt. To pay a debt, you must pay with value or substance, i.e. gold, silver, barter, or a commodity. With Federal Reserve notes, you can only discharge a debt. You cannot pay a debt with a debt currency system. You cannot service a debt with a currency that has no backing in value or substance. No contract in common law is valid unless it involves an exchange of good and valuable consideration. Unpayable debt transfer power and control to the sovereign power structure that has no interest in money, law, equity, or justice because they have so much wealth already. Continuing. Their lust is for power and control. Since the inception of central banking, they have controlled the fates of nations. The Federal Reserve System is based on the canon law and the principles of sovereignty protected in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. In fact, the international bankers used the canon law trust as their motto, adding stock and naming it a joint stock trust. The U.S. Congress had passed a law making it illegal for any legal person to duplicate a joint stock trust in 1873. The Federal Reserve Act was legislated post facto to 1870, although post facto laws are strictly forbidden by the Constitution. The Federal Reserve System is a sovereign power structure separate and distinct from the federal United States government. The Federal Reserve is a maritime lender and/or maritime insurance underwriter to the federal United States, operating exclusively under Admiralty/maritime law. The lender or underwriter bears the risk, and the maritime law compelling specific performance in paying the interest or premiums are the same. Assets of the debtor can also be hypothecated to pledge something as a security without taking possession of it, as security by the lender or underwriter. The Federal Reserve Act stipulated that the interest on the debt was to be paid in gold. There was no stipulation in the Federal Reserve Act for ever paying the principal. Prior to 1913, most Americans owned clear allodial title to property, free and clear of any liens or mortgages until the Federal Reserve Act, 1913, hypothecated all property. Prior to 1913, most Americans owned clear allodial title to property, free and clear of any liens or mortgages until the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 hypothecated all property within the federal United States to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve, in which the trustees, or stockholders, held legal title. The U.S. citizen, tenant/franchisee, was registered as a beneficiary of the trust via his or her birth certificate. In 1933, the federal United States hypothecated all the present and future properties, assets, and labor of their subjects, the 14th Amendment U.S. citizen, to the Federal Reserve System. In return, the Federal Reserve System agreed to extend the Federal United States Corporation all the credit money substitute it needed. Like any other debtor, the Federal United States government had to assign collateral and security to their creditors as a condition of the loan. Since the Federal United States didn't have any assets, they assigned the private property of their economic slaves, the U.S. citizens, as collateral against the unpayable federal debt. They also pledged the unincorporated federal territories, national parks, forests, birth certificates, and non-profit organizations as collateral against the federal debt. All has already been transferred as payment to the international bankers. Unwittingly, America has returned to its pre-American Revolution, feudal roots whereby all land is held by a sovereign, and the common people had no rights to hold allodial title to property. Once again, we the people are the tenants and sharecroppers, renting our own property from a sovereign in the guise of the Federal Reserve Bank. We the people have exchanged one master for another. This has been going on for over 80 years without the informed knowledge of the American people, without a voice protesting loud enough. Now it's easy to grasp why America is fundamentally bankrupt. Why don't more people own their properties outright? Why are 90% of Americans mortgaged to the hilt and have little or no assets after all debts and liabilities have been paid? Why does it feel like you are working harder and harder and getting less and less? We are reaping what has been sown, and the results of our harvest is a painful bankruptcy and a foreclosure on American property, precious liberties, and a way of life. Few of our elected representatives in Washington, D.C. have dared to tell the truth. The federal United States is bankrupt. Our children will inherit this unpayable debt and the tyranny to enforce paying it. America has become completely bankrupt in world leadership, financial credit, and its reputation for courage, vision, and human rights. This is an undeclared economic war, bankruptcy, and economic slavery of the most corrupt order. Wake up, America. Take back your country. Wake up, America. Take back your country. That was James Traficant's U.S. bankruptcy speech. The Bankruptcy of the United States Congressional Record, March 17, 1993, Volume 33, page H-1303.